Welcome to the Explainer. We are living through what is arguably the single most significant geopolitical shift of the entire 21st century. The tectonic plates of global power, they're moving. And they're moving fast, right between the United States and China. So our objective today is to break down this incredibly complex, high-stakes rivalry. We're going to unpack it all so you can walk away with a really solid, foundational understanding of exactly what's unfolding on the world stage right now. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive paradigm shift we've seen. Back in 1991, the reality was pretty simple, right? The Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the US emerged as the undisputed sole global superpower. We're talking a unipolar world with completely unmatched military, economic, and tech dominance. But fast forward to today, 2026, and we are in a completely different reality. We've entered an era of fierce, multidimensional global competition. So how on earth did we get from undisputed unipolarity to this massive, complex standoff?
Well, to answer that, here is our roadmap for today. First, the rise of a superpower. Then, the global economic battlefield, followed by the race for tech supremacy. After that, we'll look at military might and Taiwan, the battle for global influence, and finally, the 2026 geopolitical reality.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the rise of a superpower. Because to really understand the threat, we first have to look at just how rapidly China transformed. If we rewind to the pre-1970s, under Mao Zedong, China was running a very strict communist economic model. The country was pretty isolated and, frankly, dealing with widespread poverty. But then, the late 1970s brought a massive pivot. Deng Xiaoping rolled out reform and opening up. He essentially opened the doors to foreign investment and allowed for market-based activity. And what followed was nothing short of an economic miracle. It lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in record time. Western corporations completely flocked there for the low production costs, and by the early 21st century, China was a global manufacturing superpower. Now, a lot of American leaders actually thought this economic integration would automatically lead to political liberalization. But as we know, that didn't happen. China became an absolute economic juggernaut while firmly, tightly maintaining its one-party system.
Which brings us to Section 2, the global economic battlefield.
See, that old strategy of utilizing cheap overseas labor, it morphed into a massive strategic vulnerability. The U.S. essentially became deeply dependent on Chinese manufacturing across absolutely critical sectors. We're talking electronics, steel, batteries, solar panels, and even pharmaceuticals. For years, everybody just accepted this as the normal cost of doing global business. But then, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and it completely shattered that illusion. When global borders suddenly closed, the terrifying shortage of basic PPE and essential medicines was a huge wake-up call. American policymakers suddenly realized that massive supply chain reliance wasn't just an economic headache anymore. It was a strict, urgent national security risk.
So the crucial point is how the U.S. responded to these extreme vulnerabilities. The strategy shifted hard toward what's called economic decoupling and de-risking. Fueled by huge trade imbalances, tariffs, and constant accusations of intellectual property theft, the U.S. started actively pushing policies to bring manufacturing back home. The whole idea behind de-risking is to strengthen domestic industries and deliberately cut back on that strategic dependence on Chinese supply chains. The goal is simply to insulate and secure the U.S. economy against any future global shocks.
Let's transition to Section 3, the race for tech supremacy. This is really the central nervous system of modern geopolitical power. Because economics is just the foundation. The true power today relies heavily on semiconductors. These tiny little chips are the building blocks of literally everything that matters. AI systems, advanced military equipment, your smartphone, satellites, supercomputers. Whoever controls the microchips controls the future. And here's the reality that keeps policymakers up at night. The world's most advanced chips are almost exclusively made in one place, and it's outside the U.S. This is exactly why the U.S. has heavily restricted exports of advanced chip-making technologies to China. It's a desperate defensive move to stop them from dominating this space. And, of course, that's prompted China to pour massive domestic investment right back into their own semiconductor production. So you might be wondering, why does leading the artificial intelligence race actually matter so much? Well, it's definitely not about generative chatbots writing your emails. Experts know that the nation leading in AI is going to write the rules of the 21st century digital economy. AI is going to dictate the future of modern warfare, direct global intelligence, control economic productivity, and power advanced surveillance systems. It is absolutely the central, uncompromising frontier of this rivalry in 2026. And right alongside AI is an invisible daily war over our digital infrastructure.
The U.S. routinely accuses Chinese actors of cyber espionage, intellectual property theft, hacking defense contractors, and they've raised huge alarms over 5G data security. But Beijing fiercely denies all of this. They point the finger right back at foreign cyber threats and highlight that these data security vulnerabilities are actually a mutual issue. It's a remarkably high-stakes clash, but it's happening quietly in server rooms all around the globe.
Let's move to the physical domain. Section 4, Military Might and Taiwan.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing exactly where all that historic economic and technological growth went. It funded an incredibly rapid military modernization. We're not just talking about more boots on the ground here. We're talking about highly advanced next-generation capabilities, sophisticated anti-ship missile systems, hypersonic weapons, advanced anti-satellite tech, and a naval expansion so massive it's given China one of the largest navies on Earth. This rapid buildup is exactly what's causing the U.S. to seriously fear losing its military edge and influence over the Indo-Pacific region.
And right at the absolute center of that Indo-Pacific tension is Taiwan. It's widely considered the single most dangerous flashpoint on the map. Politically, it's a self-governed democratic island supported by the U.S. Meanwhile, China considers it a fundamental part of its own territory. But remember those highly advanced semiconductors we talked about earlier? Well, Taiwan produces over 90% of the world's most advanced chips. If military exercises around the island were to ever escalate into a real conflict, it wouldn't just be a regional crisis. It would cause an immediate, catastrophic global economic blackout, and it could easily trigger a direct U.S.-China military confrontation. Then, of course, there's the South China Sea. China has claimed large portions of these waters and actually constructed artificial islands with military installations right on them. This overrides competing claims from Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. For the U.S., this is fundamentally about international law and the freedom of navigation. And the stakes here, they are staggering. To put it into perspective, an estimated $3.4 trillion in global trade passes through these Pacific waters every single year.
Moving beyond military and tech, we hit Section 5, the battle for global influence.
This competition extends way beyond missiles and microchips into global diplomacy and infrastructure. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI, China is funding massive projects worldwide. We're talking railways, ports, roads, airports, and energy systems spreading across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. It's kind of like a modern Silk Road on steroids. And while this definitely brings much-needed development to emerging economies, the U.S. is highly concerned. They fear China is using these massive infrastructure loans to create long-term political and financial dependence, essentially buying international leverage.
But underlying all this maneuvering is a deep, fundamental clash of philosophies. On one hand, the U.S. promotes a system of liberal democracy, characterized by free speech, political pluralism, human rights, and market capitalism, and they frequently criticize China's use of censorship. On the flip side, China strongly defends its centralized one-party system. They argue their model is actually superior because it provides unparalleled social stability, rapid economic growth, national unity, and the rare ability to execute multi-decade planning without the constant disruptions of election cycles.
Finally, let's bring it all together for Section 6, the 2026 geopolitical reality. Let's move to and see how this builds into the ultimate paradox of our time. People often throw around the phrase new Cold War, right? But back in the 20th century, the US and the Soviet Union had almost completely separate economies. Today, we have a fierce, multi-dimensional strategic rivalry between two massive powers that are literally chained together economically. Global trade, international finance, modern technology, they all rely entirely on the US and China interacting. So they are competing relentlessly on every single front, yet at the end of the day, they still fundamentally need each other just to keep the global economy functioning. So what does this all mean? Will this unprecedented rivalry lead to reluctant cooperation, a prolonged cold competition, or a really dangerous military confrontation? The answer to that question won't just shape lines on a map. It is going to dictate the technology right there in your pocket, the security of your personal data, and even the prices of the goods you buy every single day. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and I hope this gave you a solid grasp on the forces shaping our world today.